2017's Happy Death Day might be one of the closest things we've ever gotten to a modern-day equivalent to the Scream series.
Assuming that I believe any of this is even possible.
Sprinklers, car alarm.
The way I see it, you have unlimited amount of lives. Unlimited opportunities to solve your own murder.
So I'm supposed to keep dying until I figure out who my killer is?
You want to live to see tomorrow, right?
I know that sounds like really high praise, but I'm being serious. Besides Cabin in the Woods, Tragedy Girls, and Behind the Mask, no other 2010s horror film has hit that balance of horror and comedy in quite the same way. It's definitely a slasher film at its core, but it's also kind of a deconstruction of that genre at the same time. It follows that generic formula of the pretty girl being chased by a psycho in a scary mask, or in this case, a baby mask. But the film does a lot with that setup, and manages to transition really well from horror to comedy throughout its runtime, and it does so with a ton of style. The film tends to make commentary on its own genre, sometimes in subtle ways and sometimes in not so subtle ways, like having there be a killer in town on the night all of this is happening just as a red herring, then revealing the killer was actually someone really close to the protagonist, in this case their roommate, much like the original Scream was the boyfriend. I will admit some of the dialogue in the film verges on being cringy, and I see a lot of people complain that it's generic in its setup, but it almost seems to be generic for the sake of humor, making fun of how predictable this genre can be, while also trying to pay homage to some of the great films in that genre. Honestly, it's really surprising to me that this film wasn't better received by critics when it first came out. I know it's gained sort of a cult following and recently gotten a sequel, which was actually pretty solid, and it wasn't trashed as bad as some other films I've done in defense of videos on, but the fact that most reviews, if they're positive, do just still refer to this movie as a meh out of 10 is still kinda disappointing to me. I personally think Happy Death Day is a blast, and I've actually grown to like it more over time, so I'm gonna try to break down in this video why exactly I love it so much. First things first, I am a massive horror movie fan. My top 100 films list on Letterboxd is littered with tons of horror films, and one of my favorite subgenres is definitely slasher films. But genuinely fun horror films seem to be far and few between nowadays. Everything is really mean-spirited or just plain bad, and there's also a lot of really unnecessary sequels. So you can imagine when I first heard someone was essentially making Groundhog Day as a slasher film, I was pretty damn excited. It was a film that made it obvious right from the get-go with its setup that it wasn't meant to be taken super seriously. There's not a lot of attempts at scares, but that's not really a problem because that's not really the point of the film. Happy Death Day is a parody of slasher films while also being a love letter to that genre at the same time. It starts off taking itself somewhat seriously and lulls viewers in with the sense that they know what's going on. Then it gradually starts getting goofier and goofier throughout its runtime, but it's clearly done on purpose and it comes off as really tongue-in-cheek to me. By the time it gets to a point that there's a pop music montage of death scenes, as Tree tries to figure out who's killing her, and eventually she just strolls across campus completely naked, it becomes super obvious that this is more of a comedy than a horror film. The second one also took this montage joke a step further and had a suicide montage along to Paramore's song Hard Times, and it was probably the best moment in the movie. Honestly, that's the main reason I'd recommend seeing it. I think it's worth giving the actors in this film credit because they're all really likable and really good in their respective roles, especially Jessica Rothe. Honestly, how is this girl not more famous? I'd love to see her land some more movie parts after seeing how charismatic and funny she is in both of the Happy Death Day films.
You know, I figured we had a nice time.
You had a nice time. I was miserable. I mean, who takes their first date to Subway? It's not like you have a foot long.
That line wasn't even in the script, by the way. According to IMDb, she just improvised it on set on the day of. I feel like Happy Death Day is another thing much like Ghost Rider 2, which I also covered in this series, where it just misled a lot of audience members, because a majority of the negative reviews I've seen just complain that it's not scary or it's predictable. I agree with both of those things. It's not really scary at all and it is predictable, but I disagree that it was ever intended to be scary or unpredictable. It's directed by Christopher B. Landon, and if you don't know who that is, it's the same guy behind Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse. So it should come as a surprise to nobody that this film ended up being so goofy and over the top.
I think you're having a bad allergic reaction to something. We need to get you to a doctor.
Like I said in the intro, it's more of a comedic love letter to the genre and should be watched with that in mind. The simplicity and predictability of the first film is also, in my opinion, why the first one works so much better than the second. Even though I really liked the second, the first film is just so much more cohesive in the way that it's told. It's a little predictable, but its presentation and its constant referencing of its own genre makes it lovable. The second one tends to get a bit too complicated, dealing with an arc reactor and time travel actually being spelled out for you, but it still stays fairly entertaining throughout, even if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I'd recommend seeing both if you get a chance. Anyway, I realize Happy Death Day isn't exactly a film I can extract some sort of deeper meaning from, so this is a much shorter and more surface level video than usual, but it's a film that I really enjoy and I feel like it gets a lot of unnecessary hate. It's a film that clearly came from someone who was a fan of the genre and wanted to make something genuinely fun, which is an aspect, as I said, that has been severely missing in a lot of horror films nowadays, and I'd highly recommend it to anybody watching the video. It's not a perfect film by any means, but it's a blast, and the sequel was pretty fun too, so you should definitely check them both out. Thanks for watching like always, guys. I realized this was a shorter video than usual, and it was super surface level and quick, but I just wanted to get something out about Happy Death Day since the second one recently opened in theaters, and it sort of reminded me that I really enjoyed the first one. And I'm hoping by making this, maybe I can convince a few more people to check this series out for themselves. I'll leave my social media links down below like usual, and I'll catch you guys next time.